welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today I'm with John Gleason, Godless Engineer. Links in the description for his channel. I think it's in the description. I'm pretty sure it is. Let me just check. Yeah, I have you at the thing, and click on that thing and go subscribe, guys. It's a good channel. I watch it as much as I can, pretty much throughout the week, pretty often. A frequent watcher of your channel. I love Bro Cephas. Bro Cephas is that he's the best. Man. He's the best.
Yeah. You know, I'm glad that you get some entertainment out of the channel. I know I haven't really I haven't touched on too much of like history and things of that nature too much here lately, but you know, that is one of the passions that I have there on the channel is addressing those kinds of ideas.
Yeah, right. And yeah, so let's get into this. The reason why I have you on is so it's a series of events. First, it all started with Carl Ruck, who is a very, he's kind of a legend. He's retired professor from Harvard, classicist, philologist, who said, I don't think this is a real story. I just think it's a myth. I don't think this is a real person. So he's a mythicist. Mm-hmm. And his classmate, another Harvard graduate, Dr. McDonald, who is a biblical scholar, came on and addressed it and was like, no, this is a conspiracy theory. He actually was a person. And so a lot of people were taken back by it, like conspiracy theory. Like, how can you say that? Like, that's kind of like a low blow. What do you think about hearing that, first of all?
Well, so it's a very nuanced thing in the way that I view it, because mythicism has been conspiracy laden for the longest time. There have been like conspiracies just far out, crazy stuff. There's a whole zeitgeist movie you could talk about, and right. There's a lot of really bad ideas that were floating around prior to 2014 when Carrier released his monograph that got academically peer reviewed and published. And so prior to that point, it was really tough to sift out and see like what is real information here. And that's the benefit that not only Carrier's book brings, but also Raphael Lataster's book, which is a little out of the reach for most people. But I luckily I got it for Christmas last year, so I've been reading through that. But what these two academics have done is sifted through all of the conspiracy stuff and gotten to like what's the most defensible position about this. And of course, Raphael Lataster goes with agnosticism on the topic, and Carrier's mythicist. But so when I hear it being called a conspiracy theory, on the one hand, I agree that there are some conspiracies surrounding mythicism and everything like that, but it would be a straw man at this point in time to only address it as a conspiracy theory. Sure. And so there's a lot of notable differences between conspiracy-laden stuff and actual academically backed, like historically backed hypotheses about it. And the first thing that you have to kind of understand is that history is a soft science. So we're not going to have empirical evidence for it, right? Well, we could have empirical evidence, but in this particular case for Jesus, we don't have empirical evidence. Like empirical evidence would be like, coins with Julius Caesar's face on it or things of that nature. We're not expecting to find any kind of thing like that. So so it's more of a soft science, it's not going to have hard evidence like that. And that's usually, that distinction right there is where a lot of conspiracy claims, like people that claim that mythicism is a conspiracy theory, often get it wrong because, they'll call it like the flat earth of atheism or whatever. The problem with that is that the arguments against the flat earthers is that, we have all of this empirical evidence that shows that they're wrong. but we're not going to have that kind of evidence like in the historical question about Jesus. So you can't really compare those two. But a better comparison as far as like conspiracies go would be like the Atwill's, Flavian Christ hypothesis compared with minimal mythicism.
Yeah.
And
Literally,
when you look at
by definition, a theory that there was a conspiracy to create a Messiah. That's by
Right.
definition. I mean, sorry, Roman Providence people, but that's a conspiracy theory. Even if you think it's
yes.
legitimate, it's by definition a conspiracy theory. But yeah, sorry. Continue.
Yeah, well, no, I agree, obviously, but Atwill's theory or hypothesis has a lot in common with like other common conspiracy theories. Not like in the lack of evidence, of course, is what really hits Atwill pretty hard. But there are a number of things that you can kind of look at to determine like if it is comparable to a conspiracy theory or if it's not. So like as with most conspiracy theories, you have ad hoc statements or claims or things that are presuppositions. So they're just sort of assumed to be this way without any real hard evidence to suggest that it's that way. And typically with conspiracy theorists, there's no room for that like there's no margin of error at all. Like it's this way, that's the only way that it can be. And even though there's no evidence for it, I'll either make up evidence for it or we don't like it's so blatantly obvious that you don't need evidence for it, right?
I've heard from people who are very critical of mythicism that an example of this would be the Nazareth thing. They would point to that and say a lot of mythicists say it's just a title, it's not even a real place. And then like I've found evidence from Pliny the Elder in 76 AD where he mentions Nazareth. So we know this was a place already in the first century. That doesn't mean it wasn't a title too. I think the Nazarene sect became a thing based off the geography of that. But what I'm getting at is I think a lot of people who are critics of mythicism will point to stuff like that, for example, as like there's another example of a conspiracy theory from the mythicists. What do you think?
Right. About that? Well, I mean, as far as Nazareth goes, Carrier in his minimal mythicist hypothesis doesn't even consider the possibility that Nazareth wasn't a real place. Like that just simply doesn't factor in because it's equally likely that Jesus could have been a real person and just claimed that he came from Nazareth, as it is that Jesus is, mythical or was never historical, and that's just part of his story. Like there's no like it doesn't benefit either hypothesis whatsoever. So there's no need to factor it in. And so, like, whenever I hear the claim, oh, well, Nazareth didn't even exist, therefore Jesus didn't exist. It's like, I think at best what you could get from that is that the gospel stories are bullshit. And there are far more arguments and examples that you could use to discredit the gospels as historically reliable than just Nazareth ain't exist. So I feel like that argument, like I cringe when I see people say, oh, well, Nazareth didn't exist, therefore Jesus didn't either. Like that makes me cringe as a mythicist.
Because then when you show them that it does, then it's like, now what? Now do you say Jesus existed now? Now are you going to go full? Like, because that seems like a horrible thing to like put all your bets on. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and see that's the important thing about any good hypothesis like covering this particular topic is that it's not like there's not going to be one linchpin in it, right? Like there's going to be multiple things that would coincide to show that Jesus was or was not a historical figure. And I mean, I think that's what we have because like in Carrier's minimal mythicism, he actually argues a fortiori in it, and that's how he gets to his 33% number. When he does all the Bayesian calculations and whatnot. But that's how he gets there. Is he argues a fortiori, and like there's a number of things that he actually puts down in favor of historicity, like a number of Paul's vague verses. He actually counts that, as evidence that Jesus could have existed historically, rather than it showing that he didn't exist or whatever. So, I mean, on if you take minimal mythicism, as it actually states things, there are a number of points in the hypothesis that actually work in favor of historicity, but yet we still only get such a small probability, a 1/3 probability, that Jesus was a historical figure. So it's never going to be one thing. And I know in the past I've kind of said, well, I'm looking for something that could only exist if Jesus existed. And depending on how strong that is, that single thing could push it over the line, but it would be that single thing in conjunction with all the other evidence that we have. So it's important to think about like how it's the entire hypothesis, not just any single piece of it.
Let me ask you this. So we've talked about this before, and if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, do you think that Paul thought that there was a guy, or do you think Paul thought this was all mythological?
Well, so I don't think that Paul thought it was mythological. And there's a bit of a nuance there with the word guy, because I think that Paul thought that Jesus had a physical body. This physical body was created by God to be a body of Davidic flesh, and that's how the Messiah accomplished his task of being persecuted, killed, and resurrecting. Under Paul's idea, though, the resurrection body is a different created body, because as far as Paul is concerned, our future, the future resurrection bodies of all the Christians are already created up in heaven, and God's got them in some kind of storehouse, like he does with the hail and the rain and everything like that. So for Paul, it's a physical body, but that's because under Jewish theology, especially in the first century and before that, heaven is a physical place, just like hell was a physical place, or Sheol or Hades, however you want to put it. They were physical places. That's why you have the Tower of Babel. If it wasn't a physical place, where in the hell were these people like building a giant skyscraper to? They were building up to try to get up to the firmament, which is the beginning of the heavenly bodies, like the heaven. And even Paul in crap, I can't remember which verse it is. I could pull it up here in a second. But Paul, he actually denotes that there was a person that was taken up to the third level of heaven, and that's where paradise is. And so Paul believes in multiple levels of heaven and how heaven's a physical place and everything like that. So, I mean, that's what Paul thought, is that there was a physical body that was created by God. But I don't think that Paul thought that Jesus was like a human birthed person.
So, okay, that actually is interesting. I never thought about it like that. So you think that Paul thought these are events that actually happened, just he was wrong, and it didn't actually happen the way he thinks it happened?
Well, no. I think Paul thought that these events happened just in the celestial realm, like it happened in the heavens, because there's like I said, there's different levels of heaven, and so it seems to me, and I mean, I've got scriptures and everything like that to back up what I'm saying here. I think that Paul considered Jesus to have descended and to have been at least killed by crucifixion or whatever other means. He was killed by Satan and his demons, in the firmament, and in the firmament is where he's buried, and then he's resurrected. And at several places in Paul's epistles, he talks about how all of this happened with nobody seeing it, nobody hearing about it, nobody ever imagining it like beforehand or whatever. he talks about how this was some kind of unseen thing, which actually goes along with something that Irenaeus says. Irenaeus talks about a sect of Christians that said that Jesus's sacrifice or Jesus or the Messiah of the Jewish people wasn't revealed until after he resurrects with a star in the sky and all that other kind of stuff. So
there's a few Christian sects that thought that. Nazarenes and the Simonians thought that. Something similar to
right.
that. Not all the same, but they have a very weird interpretation of all these events happening.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where I get stuck on. Where do you go from that to what the Gospels are saying, as in these events are happening in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth? Where does this switch happen? Like when can we point, what time period, who's doing that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I think that a lot of things were probably developing in parallel. We know that in the first century, there were a lot of different ideas about the Messiah of Judaism and Jesus specifically, because Paul was writing in the 50s, but he had been preaching this message, this gospel of Jesus, for a long time before he actually started writing stuff down. And so all of this stuff, has time to sort of develop and grow. And I think that a lot of things were developing at the same time. I think that there were sects of Jews that, Jewish Christians rather, that needed some kind of link, like historical link. But the problem is that none seem to exist. If there was a link, then I don't understand why Paul would specifically tell us that he didn't get his information about Jesus, the gospel of Jesus. He didn't get any of this from any human on earth. Like, he got all of this through revelation. And the only thing that makes you an apostle, according to Paul, is that you received this revelation of Jesus. It's not whether or not you saw it happen or you were walking with Jesus or anything like that. The only way you become an apostle is by getting a vision of Jesus. And so I think that there were sects going around that wanted to teach about Christianity and teach about the gospel of Jesus and all this other stuff. But also, I'm sure people were wanting to know, like, oh, well, how do we know that this guy, this figure right here really is the Messiah? And obviously, you had Jews or Jewish Christians that were looking to the Old Testament in order to know things about the Messiah character that we would come to know as Jesus. So I think that the Gospels developed out of this need to have this sort of historical narrative attributed to it, because they perceived Jesus or the Messiah rather to have done specific things. Like, just like with the Old Testament, you have various prophets that did all these magical things. And if Jesus is supposed to be the final prophet, the prophet of all prophets, the king of all kings, or whatever, if he's supposed to be that, then he needed to do these certain things. And so I feel like these things just came about as a necessity of people wanting to know more about it, and also the necessity of people wanting to know about the religion, about the theology, and what it teaches. Because by the time the 70s rolled down and you had the gospel starting to be written down, you have a lot of development that did go on in that amount of time. And so I just think that people were wanting those stories, or they possibly needed it in order to teach about the faith.
But so that's fine. It's not like crazy to think that. What confuses me though is that if Paul's making such an impact, why don't we see this version of Christianity in any other text or reflected anywhere else? How does Paul's vision of this heavenly thing get pushed aside by what happens with the later gospel writers? You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to find out when this, like, how do we go from this whole thing being like in the heavens to, oh, this is a real event and nobody's contesting anymore, and anybody who thought otherwise, we don't even have a voice or any evidence for that at all. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we do have some evidence because there's that passage in 2 Peter where it talks about how there are people going around saying that we believe in cleverly devised myths, but I'm going to sit here and fabricate this encounter with Jesus that we had. And so, I mean, there is evidence there. There's evidence in the 2nd century with Irenaeus talking about groups of Christians that didn't think that that Jesus or the Messiah was revealed until after his resurrection with a star in the sky and everything like that. Like that was the only way that anybody ever knew. But you also have Paul who says that all of this happened, without anybody knowing about it or anything like that. So my point in bringing this up is that what you have are people that are going around and saying, oh, well, we don't know about all this, but the only way that we know about it is in the scriptures. And so if you look at what eventually happened in the 70s with Mark's gospel being written, what they have is, a lot of connections to the Old Testament, talking about the theology of Christianity, talking about what it means to be a Christian and all of that kind of stuff. With Mark's gospel, you actually have a Docetist type of Christ. And by that, what I mean is that the gospel starts out with Jesus being baptized at the Epiphany. And what happens there is that this human person is dipped into the water and then pulled out, and then you have this image of a dove or the Holy Spirit descending upon him. And in the scholarship, that's seen as the Messiah inhabiting this body, adopting this person as being the Messiah right here. And then at the end of it, you have, of course, the Messiah escaping the body once the body dies, going back up to heaven. So you do have sort of it's a shift from one kind of aspect to another. Now, I don't know exactly what would have it compelled people to sort of create these stories. I mean, I guess I'd have to ask what compelled previous pagan religions to create stories about their gods and deities. Like why did they write euhemerize? Why were those people euhemerized in history? Being that they were only seen as celestial, and then they later created these earthly stories about them and claimed that they were historical the entire time. Why would they do that? Could it be because this was a mystery religion, and so you have people that were being told one story on the outside, being that these are the Gospels of Jesus, this is what happened during Jesus's life, but then as Paul says, people that are inducted into the faith, that are at a certain level within the religion, they are told like the true things about it, because that's how a mystery cult works. And that's essentially what early Christianity was. It was a mystery cult. And so the Gospels under the whole mystery cult thing, the Gospels would have been the forward facing stories, and then the true meaning behind the Gospels would be taught as like to members that have already been initiated into the cult. And so you actually have in Mark him Jesus explicitly saying that to the forward facing people, these are going to be parables, but you, the initiated and inducted, will know the true meaning of these stories. Of course, in Mark's gospel, he's talking about the many parables that he tells, but I think this is a nod to the inducted, the initiated into the cult, that these are forward facing stories, while we are teaching you guys the truth behind these stories. And this is actually similar to other mystery cults that were going around at the time, like the Isis and Osiris cult. Plutarch tells us that the Isis and Osiris cult had these forward-facing stories to the outside world that showed Isis and Osiris as historical persons. Right. And then those that are inducted into the religion, they know that none of that happened like in history, it all happened in the celestial planes, which would have been outer space, or just above the earth, outside of the earth, was seen as the celestial realm, which was a physical place and all this other stuff. So, I mean, I think that probably a lot of it has to do with like the whatever would compel other mystery cults to create these forward-facing stories.
That's a good point, because you have less than 100 years. It's like 60 years before the time of Jesus. You get these stories by Diodorus of Sicily. It was even called the Bibliotheca, which is the Bible. And it's stories about Osiris, Hercules, Dionysus, all these Prometheus. But he's telling these stories as if they happen on Earth, and he's mentioning real places. Hercules went to Ethiopia, Dionysus went to India, Prometheus was in the Black Sea. And people believe these stories. They thought they were real. So what you're saying is plausible. Let me ask you this, though. And I guess a way to go to play the advocate on this. Most critical scholars agree that most of the Gospels are mythological. They're borrowing from the Old Testament mostly, but also borrowing from the culture of the times. As you mentioned, being a mystery cult, it fits in with its time period. It's like an evolution of religion. And you got like Jesus being a new Abraham. He's also a new Joseph. He's also a new Adam. He's also you have these like little stories woven within the Gospels of him doing similar things that happened to the patriarchs, like him getting sold for 20 shekels or 30 shekels, like Joseph, by Judas instead of Judah. Well, there's a lot of examples like that. When you strip all those examples away, what we're left with is a guy named Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. That's basically it. Like, that's the only thing we can say that we can't take from somewhere else. Now, do you think it's possible that could be a historical kernel right there?
Well, all right. So, is the question, do I think that the crucifixion is a historical kernel?
Yeah, I'm saying, like, do you think it's possible that, because everything you said I agree with, because a lot of these mythological characters are euhemerized, and plus the Gospels are clearly and the same typology, the same method of writing these myths that you would see in the Old Testament or like somewhere else, like Virgil or something. And my question is that when we strip all that away, like I said, what's left is this tiny fraction, which we see in Paul, a guy who was crucified. Paul mentions it all the time. Christ crucified for our salvation, this, that. But you're right. He doesn't give details. He doesn't talk about what happened. He just says Christ got crucified. That's it. And so do you think it's possible that could be the historical Jesus right there? And that's all we have.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a possibility. And I think that you could definitely make an argument that that is one piece of evidence. And that's one of the arguably better pieces of evidence, I would say, that historicists have. But I think that a closer look into how Paul talks about the crucifixion and specifically who crucifies Jesus, it starts to waver for me. And that's primarily due to how Jewish theology described, the heavens, and how they described demons and Satan. Well, the Jews weren't describing Satan, but they definitely had a theology about demons and lesser divine beings that were evil in nature and all this other stuff. And how they describe all of that, and then how Paul refers to those things, because Paul is very I guess you could say vague in it. For one thing, you've got Paul saying, and I'm actually currently working on an 8-page I'm at page 8 right now of a response to a 3-minute video about mythicism, where I've had to do extensive I had to relook into this and bring it up. But there's 1 Corinthians 2:6-10, where it's the only reference that Paul has to Jesus being crucified, and who is doing it. Well, I misspoke. It's not the only reference to Jesus being crucified. It's the only reference to who crucified Jesus. So 1 Corinthians 2:6-10 says, Yet among the mature, we do impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away, but we impart a secret hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages of our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of a man imagined, and what God has prepared for those who love him, these things God has revealed to us through the Spirit, for the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. So right there it says, none of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So who could that be referring to? Now, the rulers of this age is a very specific title that's given, and specifically in the Greek there, it's the archons of this aeon, right? And it's very common at this point in time for archons of this aeon to refer to demons and Satan. This matches up with Jewish theology.
It's also used in the term like archon is the governor of Athens. They're called archon.
Well,
it's
true,
like a rule.
But is that that person called the archon of this aeon?
Well, I mean, an aeon age could be talking about the time that we're in. We're in the time of Herod, maybe the age of Herod. You could use that phrase for that, you know.
Well, I mean, while true, that's not how Paul routinely means it. Because when Paul says that Satan is the archon of this world, I mean, it's very similar phrasing right there. Also, when Paul talks about who are the enemies of Christ or the enemies of Christians, he talks about fighting it against the principalities and powers, right? That's a pretty common thing. Who are the principalities and powers there? Are they the Romans? Like, typically the principalities and powers are supernatural, and they are Satan and the demons.
I think Paul is talking about both in this case. I think he's talking about the powers and rulers of this age are people who are not they're not saved. They're not they're just basically power, like they're rulers
demonically possessed.
Yeah, like sort of. I think that's what he's getting at. That's what I think he's actually getting at.
But I don't think that we actually have any evidence that suggests that Paul thinks that the Romans and whoever else is demonically possessed. Also, if you try to combine that with the notion that Paul considers all of the human authorities to be subjected to him, like because there's that notion that God has installed the authorities, they installed kings and all this other stuff. I feel like thinking that the Romans or the human authorities at this time were demonically possessed is kind of counter to the idea that God put them there, unless you're trying to say that God had the demons possess the rulers, and then the rulers were doing things that God didn't want or something like I don't know. It seems to convolute the entire theology of not only Paul but Christians in general. I mean, I guess that is a possible understanding.
I can see it being. I'm not saying you're off. It could be, you could be right, but I know for a fact that word archon is used just as the word for who's governing the city of Athens. Like it was, if you read like Livy, it'll say every chapter, now we're in the year of the archonship of Demosthenes, or we're in the archonship of, it's just a normal word. It's not always used spiritually, but it could be.
Well,
and I know what you mean by a lot of these texts have these aeons and archons of this age in this spiritual sense. So I'm not saying that can't
well, not just that, but the fact that Paul refers to archons of this aeon, and then Paul also identifies Satan as the archon of this world. Similar phrasing there when Paul talks about the enemies of Christians and of God and all that, enemies of Jesus. He talks about the principalities and powers, which are Satan and his demons. There's also the fact that in Jewish theology, you have Satan and his demons inhabiting the firmament, of the heavens, because it's a real physical place. So there was a very common belief back then, not just amongst Jews, but of other people as well, that every aspect of reality was inhabited by beings of some kind. And so the firmament being inhabited by these demons and Satan ultimately, I mean, it fits with the surrounding context and culture that Christianity grew up in. And so while I think that it's possible that you know he could have been Paul could have been referring to the Romans here, I don't think that it's got a very parsimonious. I don't think it is a very parsimonious explanation when you consider all of the surrounding context of who Paul identifies as these enemies of Jesus, which it would be the enemies of Jesus that wants to keep the earth subjected to like the darkness and the evil of men and everything like that, that would have prevented Jesus's crucifixion on the cross. So when Paul says that the rulers of this age wouldn't have done this if they knew who Jesus was, I don't see how that makes sense with the Romans, because the Romans could, either just not care because they don't believe in their bullshit, or the Romans, I guess could have stopped it, or could have. No, if the Romans didn't believe in their bullshit, then they wouldn't have stopped it. If the Romans believed in their bullshit, then they would have crucified Jesus in order to gain salvation. So, I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to suggest that the rulers of this age are the Romans or any other human powers. Also, the whole notion of rulers of this age only meaning the Romans or only meaning Pilate or something like that doesn't make a lot of sense, because I would feel like the rulers of this age would be a collective group of like everybody in power on the planet. Like they would be the rulers of this age, and they would be responsible for killing Jesus.
It is definitely a weird way to talk about the Romans, and then why not just say the Romans? Like I'm with you on that. It is a very weird phrase to use. I would chalk it up like we were talking about the Ganime thing, the birth thing, and that word is usually used for births, regular births, but it's also used in to produce or to manufacture as well. Actually, I have I have a list of the every time it's been used through Perseus Tufts, and it's used in so many different ways that I can't even use that as an argument to say that it just means regular birth. It could be a lot of different things, but that word is the word for birth too. Like ganomai is the word for birth, but once again,
well, yeah, but see, the thing is, for me, when you're looking to analyze like whether or not genomai is talking about birth when Paul uses it, I feel like you have to take how Paul uses that word into context, because if Paul regularly switches up genomai and genao in his text for referencing other people that have been birthed, then yeah, that you might have a point there, that he really could mean that. But I feel like the fact that Paul never uses that word when referencing other births, other births other than Jesus's birth or body.
Does he reference other births at all?
Yes,
Which
he does.
Like who?
Huh? Like who? Let's see. I've actually got that in my script here.
That would be very interesting to point out that if he uses, this is the word. Oh, it's still small. I thought I made it better. The word I pulled up the word age and ion, and it's but yeah, look, while you're finding that, let me pull this up real quick. But yeah, the birth thing. So the definition is childbirth, beginning, coming into being. So yeah, it's very, you can't say it's one way or the other. I also have the uses of it that go back to like 500 BC to Herodotus, and to your credit, the use of that word is so different. It's all over the place. They're using it for a lot of. You can use the word ganime for I made wine. Use it for the child was born yesterday. You can use it for almost anything. It's to come into being. That's what it is. But it's also the word birth.
Right. So if you look at Romans 9, 10, and 11, you'll find that is referencing other like other people being born. Let's see, Romans 9, 10 to 11. Oh, you got it.
No, that's something else.
Oh,
I was just making
okay. So
Okay.
Romans 9, 10 through 11 says, and not only this, but when Rebekah also had conceived by one, even by our father Isaac, for the children being not yet born, neither having done any good or evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. So this is talking about children that have yet to be born, but will be born, right?
And what's the word they use there? Do you know?
Genao.
Okay, so yeah, it's the same word.
No.
That's the word birth. The suffix at the end has to do with accusative, dating, and it's like a gender, or it's how you're using it. It's
genomai is different than genao. They're totally different in Strong's Concordance.
Genaho, that's the one for what? Which verse?
That's Romans 9, 10 through 11 is where genao, G-E-N-N-A-O.
Romans 9, 10 through, but that's okay. That's the one. But it's still the same root word. It's still the same word.
No, it's not.
What do you mean? It's genomai.
No, it's not genomai.
Okay, so wait. All right, here's the word right here. Here's the definition according to this is according to lexicon, and it's first it's got gena. Just that's how you start. That's the base word. David Hillman, if you're here, dude, you could jump on because he's my Greek teacher. He's an expert. I wonder if he can jump in on this, but I don't know if he's still here or not.
Well, look, okay. So when I go to the 911 Greek interlinear, I'm using Bible Hub. It's the 911 Greek interlinear, not having yet been born, right? And that's Strong's character 1080. Greek 1080, genao, G-E-N-N-A-O.
Yeah, but the suffix at the end is used for how it's being determined through accusative, dative. What else is there? There's different forms of this. It's the same word using different forms. I'll show you what I mean.
Well, it says it says that this is the original word, like the root word that's used, because it's not genao that's used. Like I get it. I understand the masculine, feminine. I'm not disputing that, but like the been born part is genanathon or something is what the actual word is. The root word for that is not genomai. Genomai is a completely different word. The root word there is Strong's Greek 1080, and there's no indication.
Hold on, let me just see if I can pull this up real quick, because I have the Perseus Tufts thing where it actually has all of the. Why do I have so many of these files up? Shit. But okay, what was I here? Is this no? That's not it either. All right, well, never mind. Well, okay, so let's look this up then. Let's just look this up one at a time. Let's look up the first word, because I mean, from what my understanding is, it's the same word in different contexts, so it has an altered use of it. To be born or was born, it would have a different. It would sound different and be used differently, if that makes sense. And it's the genai, G-E-N-N-A is the word, but it's changed up based on to be born or was born or is about to be born. You know what I mean?
Okay. I guess I don't understand. I mean, maybe this is where your friend.
I wish he was still here. He was just here, but I know he jumped.
Maybe I angered him too much, but
root is genao. So that's what someone else said. Root is genao. That's not the same person. That's not my teacher, but that's Jason. I think he knows Greek pretty good, but Jason, if you want to jump in and explain it, genao is the casual form of genomai. Neil is right. That's what David Hill. He's a PhD in Greek. I'm just saying. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't mean you're wrong it's the same word, but it doesn't mean that the word could be used in a different context, is what I'm saying.
So I guess I'm wondering why strong.
Genau. That's the word for
Huh?
birth. That's the word for birth. Genau. That's birth. But that word can be altered and changed depending on how it's used, and it could mean to come into being or to create. So
okay. Well, I guess I just maybe I don't understand the function of Strong's concordance then, and why other people have identified this as being different. Other people that are also fluent with Koine Greek, like I don't understand why. Strong. Well, hold on. So Strong's concordance doesn't identify it as being connected to Genao. The NAS exhaustive concordance doesn't identify it as being connected to Genao.
But think about it. What's word? The word gen aho. Don't you see it? Don't you see?
Well, I'm not saying that they're not related in some kind of fashion. I'm just saying that they are like they're used completely differently. When you use Genao, it's
because it's someone who's about to be born.
Well, no, okay. Well, no. So I don't think like it's. I mean, it does not seem to indicate to me that as far as looking at the actual information here, it looks to me like whether or not Genomai or Genao are somehow connected in a collection of words for creation, being created, or manufacture, or being born. It's very obvious that both words are used distinctly in Paul's letters, and for Paul to use Genomai, which means more, coming into being, becoming, and all that, versus the Genao, which is more explicit about birthing another human. I mean, there's still two, like, to say that, oh, this is the same word, it's not.
Well, it's the same root word, is what we're saying. It's the same.
Well, I mean, I get what you're saying, but you specifically said they're the same word.
No, I never. I thought maybe I didn't say it right. I was trying to be clear that they're used in different contexts with different suffixes and different variations of the word. So the word will change, but that gen is the word for birth. That gena is the word for birth. So you'll get that word this is the Oxford. It is casual beget, mostly of the father, parents, mother, bring forth oneself, also create, produce from oneself. See, so it is a term used for different things, but yeah, we don't have to argue about that for hours. I mean, neither of us are experts.
Well, no. But maybe I was speaking past you a little bit, because I totally understand them being connected because they're both dealing with similar ideas. But what I was talking about was that they are used very differently, like especially in Paul's context. They're used very differently, and I feel like it's a little straw manny to look at like Romans 9:11 that uses one word, and then you look at like Galatians 4:4 that uses a different word, and chalking it up to just, oh well, one's masculine, one's feminine, or one there's a shift in like there's a shift in something there, but it's the same word being used. I feel like that's misrepresenting like what's actually in the text.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just I'm not. What I'm saying is, it's the verb. The verb is in common. The use of it is different. So I'm not saying it's exactly the same. I'm not saying we have two, and I'm not even saying that what you're saying isn't true, that they could be speaking of some sort of heavenly birth. But what I am saying is it can't be that it can't be just that. It could go either way, if you know what I'm saying.
Well, I mean, I think that because of the fact that Genomai is used to talk about human births, that is possible. But I guess, at least for me, seeing the stark contrast in Paul's usage of it, is what convinces me that he's not meaning like a literal birth, like in Galatians 4:4, which Galatians 4:4 has a larger allegorical context to it, which kind of compiles onto my interpretation of 4:4. But like in Romans 1:3, Paul uses genomai instead of genao. However, that is that verb is reconstructed in both places. Paul explicitly used one over the other when referencing Jesus's body, and it seems to me like the fact that Paul only ever talks about Jesus's body in that way, and he talks about other people's bodies in a different way. There's definitely a distinction being made there for Paul.
It's possible. So those were our differences. We differ on when exactly this thing becomes historicized. Who knew it was who knew it wasn't historical? That's my question. Which one of the founding Christians were actively, who knew this wasn't true, but are actively telling people this was like a historical thing? When does that happen? Basically, those are my questions. I'm not asking you to answer that. That's almost impossible to answer. That's where we differ. I think we differ on some of the language that Paul uses, but I really want to get this message across, because I agree with you and Richard Carrier on so many levels that the evidence is terrible. It just is. And like you get a lot of Christians who will, not just Christians, but even just people who are like, they just want to like, shut down mythicism. And they have these sources, these extra biblical sources that are just terrible, especially the Christians. Actually, I should have just said the Christians, like Gary Habermas with the creeds thing. Like, do you understand? There's people who listen to Gary Habermas because he's a PhD, and he writes a lot of books about Jesus, and he tells people that there's these creeds were floating around in the 30s. He says we got data from the 30s. What? Oh, what he does is he references little parts of the epistles that Paul's looking back on, and then dates them on his own, just randomly dates them. So it's like, how does that count? I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I know that with Gary Habermas and his creeds, he's for years put forth like that the Pauline Creed, or in 1 Corinthians 15, that dates back to just right after Jesus, was crucified. And usually, I think most historians are fine with dating that creed to be pretty early. I guess maybe based on other circumstances or something like that. I don't necessarily have a problem with them dating it to the 30s, but I mean that just means that's when this creed popped up, or the beliefs surrounding Jesus started to form. That it doesn't, like the whole creeds argument doesn't actually point to a person existing. No. It points to a belief either forming or existing.
I mean, that's like me saying, so Diodorus of Sicily in the 30 BCE, he wrote down that Dionysus went to India in 1000 BC. So we have evidence of 1000 BCE that Dionysus was in India. That's basically what it is. You're using a source to backdate to a hypothetical idea. Like, it doesn't even make sense. So that one we just cross off the list. There's no debate there. That's just a crazy nonsense. That's not extra biblical source. That's just crazy talk. And then the next one that comes after that people point to is who's this Thales guy? Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, I do.
It's crazy.
Well, yeah. So if I remember correctly, phallus and phlegon are commonly referenced together, but it's not a text that we have now, and in fact, it's like third-hand information. But actually the phallus thing, it only talks about like I think it may talk about an eclipse. I can't remember which one talks about an eclipse or an earthquake. But either of them, they talk about earthquakes and eclipses. And so they're trying, like the whole apologetic is that, oh well, they mentioned these things happening at this time, so that must mean that Jesus was actually crucified or something like that. But the problem is that the sources, if you actually read them, or at least what like Julius Africanus says about them, you'll notice that it never pins down like an area that it happened in, and also we don't have any evidence that suggests that there was any earthquakes or eclipses that would have happened in the area of where Jesus would have been crucified.
Yeah, he could be talking about anybody. Like, it literally doesn't even make sense. It's such a, and the kicker for me is that we don't even have a copy of that. We have someone quoting, like referencing it. Basically, it's not even, we don't even have the original source or even a copy of it. It's just gone. So you're really just relying on the church tradition to tell you what it says. And look, that could be a conspiracy theory for me to say the church messed with the text. Sure. But we have evidence that they did that. It's like if you're in court, you don't just call someone a liar who's under oath. But once they get caught under oath lying, now they're not credible anymore. The church would lose all its credibility if they were under oath. Eusebius, we know he was forging text. We have quotes from Eusebius that says, sometimes you gotta lie to really make things happen. Like, he said something along the lines of that. I forgot what it was. I probably paraphrased it, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, where Eusebius has phrases like that when you're like, come on, dude. Like, he's telling stories about Peter and hanging out with Philo. It's like, that didn't happen. It just didn't happen. They want it to happen and the reason why they want it to happen is because there's no way that Jesus could be performing all these miracles and someone like Philo, who's writing in the time of Caligula after Jesus is gone, we have a whole decade or two for this to sink in and spread throughout the land, if this is all true. And sure enough, Philo has no idea, doesn't even mention Jesus, but he mentions there being a logos who's going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. He even mentions that the name Jesus is one of the highest names, salvation of Yahweh. He's so close that it doesn't make any sense for him to not mention Jesus if he knew about him. So there's no way he knew about him.
Right. And I mean, if this Messiah figure was a historical person and is exactly described as Paul describes him, Paul or Philo would have had a vested interest in mentioning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so that's another thing is like, that's another thing that pulls me over to mythicism is you have these writers, and I think the main two, there's actually might be main three, because you have what's his name of Damascus, I can't remember, something of Damascus. He's a Jewish writer writing right before Josephus, and he's writing about all the events that are happening in the first century with Herod and all these, no Jesus. You got that. You got Pliny the Elder, and he talks about Nazareth, talks about the Essenes, talks about prodigal births, talks about the events happening in Judea. He spends a lot of time there. He's meeting with the Essenes. No Jesus. And those, to me, that's like, people roll their eyes at that. It's like, oh, that's just an argument from silence. It's like, no, these people were in those areas and they're writing about these subjects. I'm not gonna go crazy and start talking about some Roman, maybe Seneca in the first century. He's in Rome. Who cares? He doesn't know about this stuff. But these people are in Judea. They're in Israel. They're in Nazareth. And we're talking about 2 decades, 3 decades later. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And so an argument from silence is really only fallacious when, that it's concerning a context where you wouldn't expect like us to hear about something or whatnot. If you're talking about writers and people that were writing about the exact events that would have fallen under, something that Jesus did or something that would have definitely included Jesus, it's definitely an oddity that they don't. Yeah. And I don't think that anybody should have that as like their case for mythicism. I think that it's one of those things that mythicism can explain, but historicists, they can't.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely a points for mythicists type thing, like, if that makes sense. We got a couple super chats, just on like 2 or something like that.
Great.
Yakuvi, who is the first mythicist?
Well, I mean, I mean, I don't know. I don't see it. I don't know if this is like kind of a gotcha thing.
It might
Look,
be.
as far as mythicists, in that the first group of people that didn't believe in a historical Jesus, like in a Jesus that walked on earth, I mean, you'd probably have to point to whoever 2 Peter is referencing, or Irenaeus is referencing, or anybody that would have thought about Jesus as more of a celestial person rather than a historical person. And there definitely were people like that were going around at the end of the first and in the second century. They were effectively snuffed out, though, as time goes on. So that we don't have a lot of information about them. We just have the very few references, like in 2 Peter, that just sort of that he doesn't name drop anybody. He just says, oh, there are some people out there that think that we believe in myths. And so I think that that's all that we're ever going to have, because either due to selective what's the word I'm looking for here? Like the Christians selected which text to keep up.
Oh, that's definitely true. They controlled the libraries, the academia for like a good 1,000 years.
Right. So
like 400 to like 1400, there was no academia or library stuff or passing down text. It wasn't through the church.
Right. So, I mean, I don't think it was necessarily malicious. I just think that it was definitely not the orthodox views, and so they probably weren't maintained. Although there is evidence of malicious editing in a lot of stuff. So I mean, that did happen, but as far as like references to these things, I don't think necessarily it was malicious, unless it was malicious for them to not preserve them. That's the word I was looking for earlier, is preserve.
And there's only one more. It's Derek. Shout out to two great people. Crucifixion really made me rethink the historicity in Paul. Interesting. But yeah, I just wanted to. So right before we go, I just want to touch on one thing. This is a really an interesting point that even Steve Mason was like, yeah, this is something to think about. And he's a staunch historicist. He's expert in Josephus. He mentions that the Testimonium Flavianum is almost not even known by what's his name? Origin.
Yeah.
And it's like Origin doesn't even know that it's there almost. He doesn't even mention that there being a skeleton version of this text. He just acts like it's not even there. So what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think that that's a pretty strong, argument from silence there. It's definitely not fallacious, because Origin was looking into Josephus, for information about Jesus and all this other stuff. He even misinterpreted or misattributed, the whole James reference to, I believe it was Hegesippus. He used Hegesippus's reference.
Because I had that. Yeah. I want to show people about that. Go ahead.
Well, yeah. So I think Origin used Hegesippus's reference of James and thought that it was Josephus's reference to James, or he portrayed it that way, or whatever. But yeah, so Origin didn't know about it, and it actually isn't used until Eusebius in the 3rd century. So most likely it either it was definitely a malicious insertion sometime between Origin and Eusebius. So I know that I can't remember the scholar's name right now, but there's a lot of scholars out there that have shown that it's a Christian similar to Eusebius that most likely wrote it and put it into Josephus. So I mean, there's a lot of different details that I could go into about that specifically if we really wanted to.
Well, I'm actually more, because I agree for the most part that this text, something's going on there. They're screwing with that text. We're not going to argue on that. That's a fact. What I'm interested on is the Adelphoi thing in the other mention of Jesus, And I've actually just recently have come to think that, because I used to kind of be like, okay, Carrier, I think he's stretching on this one with the brothers thing, because I'm like, yeah, Christians call themselves brothers all the time. I get that, but this doesn't seem like one of those instances. And then I started reading John Kloppenborg's book, even though this has nothing to do with mythicism. This was totally separate. And I came across he's mentioning some of the earliest Christian tombs that we have, and almost all of them have that Adelphoi on it. There's a Cairo. Mm-hmm. Now, these are only a couple examples, but if you notice, the ones that don't have them are from 350, 276, 300. The early ones, 212, 200, Adelphoi. There's a lot more examples. I looked into it. And the earlier you get, the more frequent you get Adelphoi Cairo, Brothers of the Christ, all over the burials. So I just wanted to point that out and hear what your thoughts are. There's a possibility that you and Carrier and other people who point this out, the brother of Christ thing, it could be true. It could be. I'm not saying it is. I'm not sold, but it's plausible, and there's data for it, and there's evidence for it. There's archaeology for it.
Well, and there's information in Paul's own writings that is the reason why I'm swayed by the fictive kinship definition of Adelphoi rather than like blood relationship, because just like with the genomai genao thing, which I just want to say that I know that I got kind of heated earlier about the words, but I really do appreciate you pointing out how the root words are the same, to me, because I obviously was talking past what you were, telling me. But anyways, with Adelphoi, it can be used to mean blood relative, but it can also be used to mean fictive kinship. And the reason why I'm more convinced of a fictive kinship in this situation is there's a few different prongs to it. So for one thing, to say that you're a brother of the Lord, you're talking about a celestial figure. Like Jesus wasn't considered the Lord until after he resurrected and he was in heaven. Like that's who the Lord is, Jesus after he resurrects. So there's that aspect of it. The other aspect of it is Paul's theology on what it means to be in the family of Christ, or the family of the Lord, or of God. And he says this in multiple different passages in the authentic epistles of Paul. But basically, his theology is that once you become a baptized Christian, and you're in the faith, you're inducted into the faith, you become a brother or sister of God. And with Jesus being the firstborn son, you effectively become a sibling of Jesus.
Yeah, you become a son of God. Yeah,
right. And so that whole idea, his whole theology around it, and the fact that Paul references like different people that he meets as being a brother, and there's also the second reference other than Galatians 1:19, where he talks about, he gives he gives a list of people, and he's basically bitching about being given food and shelter and all this other stuff, but he talks about the brothers of the Lord there. And the thing is that earlier when he's talking about fellow Christian women, that the other apostles, the other Christians are married to women, and he calls them the female case of Adelphoi. And so it's in that particular sentence, to me, it only makes sense if Paul is using the feminine version of Adelphoi to mean sisters as literal sisters. If you're going to take the brothers of the Lord to be literal brothers, it doesn't make sense. Like, I don't know, and maybe this is just my ignorance of Greek or whatever, but I don't know how in that case you would be able to distinguish between those two. Like if you were to say, oh, well, that's meaning fellow Christian wives, not literal sisters, and this one's literal brothers. Like, I don't know what in there would give me the indication to make that swap. So it seems to me like, you would be using fictive kinships there all the way through, rather than sort of a cherry picking meaning of it.
Yeah, and I think that's where we get our first extra biblical source that's secular is 96 AD. That's a long time, because like before
Yeah.
that's it. That's the one, and like you said, the mention of is about James, not even about Jesus. It's about James, and it's like, who is he? He's in some movement called the Christians. We don't know a lot about it. It's just a quick little one-off, little half a sentence. And then what's interesting about that though is the next thing we have. There could have been something in between, but what we have passed down to us is Pliny the Younger, almost 20 years later, and he doesn't even know who these guys are. So there's no way that these are like some giant movement happening. He's just hearing about them for the first time. I mean, this show, the way he talks about them, and the way Suetonius and Tacitus talk about the Crestus, they don't even say his name right. It's like this is their first hearing about this movement. It's almost like it's just starting to take off in the 2nd century. And I've had other scholars tell me Christianity really is just a 2nd century thing. It's not even a 1st century thing.
Well, definitely not the Christianity that we have now.
Right.
Because the Christianity we have now is obviously very different. But I don't think that Christianity fully came into like a lot of its major tenets until much later. But as far as like with Pliny the Younger, I feel like with those extra biblical sources, you have to really take a look at what's actually being said in it. And all that Pliny says is that, hey, there's these Christians, they believe this crazy shit, and I killed some of them, kind of thing. And so like there's no,
contrary to the belief of the martyrs, what is the Trajan tells them? Just leave them alone.
Right.
So you get the opposite of this whole narrative that they're all being slaughtered throughout the centuries. Yeah, there are some emperors like Diocletian. He persecuted the Christians pretty bad. There are a few examples, but it wasn't every single Roman emperor. It wasn't for 200 years straight. And by the way, the persecution they did to the pagans when they got in power is a million times worse than the persecution they got. So it's a laughable thing. But like you mentioned, like it's what they say about them is like it's just a weird group, weird offshoot basically of Judaism at that point,
It definitely was. And I mean, that's reflected in, just about every piece of writing we have, concerning Christianity, like the early writings, because like, especially with the Gospels, those are reflective of Jewish theology and Jewish scripture. Paul's theology is reflective of, what's in the scripture. I mean, Paul directly says that he got his information either from visions or the scriptures. And that's the only way that he says he knows about the crucifixion too, is that the scriptures say so.
Right.
And so, and so it's kind of interesting to me, the fact that here's the one thing that really bothers me is that our earliest source, Paul, says that he never claims to know anybody that knew Jesus. And in fact says that all of his information he got about Jesus did not come from any person on earth, that he only got it from either visions of Jesus, and then separately he talks about scripture also being a way that I guess Jesus communicated to him, but that he didn't get any of his information from anybody. So to me, what that says is that we have literally no connection, like historical connection at all, to a historical figure.
No, you're right.
But yet, supposedly we have these very vague references that establish him as a historical figure. And, I know that a lot of people like Bart Ehrman, but I still can't get over the fact that Bart Ehrman, as well as plenty of other scholars, they just sort of fabricate information. Like they fabricate sources in order to suggest that there's multiple independent attestation of Jesus. Because they've created the Q document, they've created the M document and the L document, and
this is what we agree on. We agree. This is what we agree on: is that there first of all, there's no primary sources. Paul's a secondary source. There's no physical evidence. There's no archaeology. Jesus didn't write anything down. It all is based off hearsay, a generation later, maybe even 2 generations later, and that's why this is why I wanted to end on this. Is I think it's nuts to call this a conspiracy theory. I think this is a legitimate theory that this could have been could have been a myth. I don't think that. I think it's more likely that there was a guy that came down to Jerusalem who had a big following who got killed, and they wrote a bunch of myths about him. To me, it's just very likely that that could be the case. But
I agree.
Yeah, and I know you.
Well, well, I'm sorry. I don't agree that that's the most likely case, just because
no, I'm saying it's possible, right?
Yeah.
And I know I've always known you felt that way, and you're not dogmatic about it. But like, you could be right. Like that's for me. For people to say this is a conspiracy theory and this is left bonkers out in space and the moon is cheese or this is flat earth shit, you're just not. You just don't know. You just don't know the information. You're not studying this stuff. You're not like reading this stuff. It's not that crazy to think that. It's really not that far away from being a myth. It really is. It basically is. Mythicism is like 98% true, because all we have is this little tiny narrative of a guy who had a following who got killed. That's it. That's all you got. Everything else we can point to and say, oh, this part of the Gospels, oh, that seems to be drawing from Genesis 42. Oh, this part of the Gospels, oh, that seems to be borrowing from Chronicles 3. This part of the Gospels, and I'm telling you, once you subtract all that away, you have a guy named Jesus who got crucified. That's it. Mm-hmm. And that's what I tried. That's what I'm trying to get across, is like, mythicists are not to be like just pushed to the side. Like there's real debates to happen in this topic for sure.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, I definitely want, more people to talk about it. Although I will say that both sides of this discussion, historicists and mythicists, for some reason they love to jump to the being a dick about it kind of thing. And I think that that's one thing that we really need to kind of try to change. And I mean, I've tried to kind of curb that a little bit. Like, I've talked to Derek recently, about it, and we had a great conversation. We are both on, two different, sides of the issue, but, we're still able to have a good conversation about it. And I mean, right. Even us, we disagree about certain things, but, despite however heated it may have seemed earlier, I mean, I was definitely not trying to be a dick about anything.
Yeah, I know.
And but my point is that I think that having good conversations, like the conversations that we're having, the conversations I've had with like Derek and, other people, I feel like that's what we really need: calm discussion over this, and stop trying to paint either side as being like crazy.
Right.
I hope I haven't solidified anybody's idea that I'm crazy.
No, and you do a good job of distancing yourself from the people who just are like, he's basically Mithra. Mithra was born December 25th, and Horus died on a cross. So like all this crazy stuff.
I fucking hate that shit.
It makes the mythicists look bad, but you do a great job of really distancing yourself from those type of internet sensations, whatever you want to call it. So
yeah,
it's based on you're looking at the sources. That's what it is. Let's see what the sources tell us. That's it.
Well, yeah, and when it comes down to it, it's all about interpretation. It's all about how you're going to interpret like what either Paul is saying or other people are saying. And I feel like that's where, like, especially in Paul, that's where kind of the meat of things are now, because like you were saying earlier, most scholars, especially critical scholars, consider the Gospels to be mythological inventions for the most part, and where the dispute happens is like, what can we know historically that's contained in the Gospels? And I differ from the mainstream on it. I guess mainstream critical scholars is that I don't think that we know or can know if there's any kind of historical information contained in the Gospels, just because we don't have any good criteria to discern between the two. And everything that I've heard from people that assert different portions of the Gospels being historically accurate, I have not found them convincing. Like they've either got to ad hoc present information, or they've got to misrepresent information, or
Gary Habermas said it, so it must be true.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
The same guy who thinks there's more evidence for Jesus than Alexander the Great. It's so cringe to even say that. It's like, wow. There's one more super chat, and I'll let you go because you've been here for a while. Do you think this is the same with Thomas the Twin, historical or mythical? His churches date back to very early in India, but he features heavily in non-canonical Gnostic and highly fanatical. I've heard that India thing. I have to look into that. I'm not. I've heard that there's a church of Thomas in India. I've heard that before. I don't know when it started though. I'm not sure how early it is. For all I know, it could be like 4th century or something. But like, it could be even later than that. It could be 10th century. I'm not sure. It's a good question, but yeah, I have to look into that.
I guess with Thomas the Twin, is he rumored to be Jesus's twin or something?
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, I think because I think Thomas the Twin was twins with somebody else, right? He was like twins with Judas.
Oh,
yeah, because there's like Thomas the Twin. Yeah, but sometimes I've heard that it's confusing because they're like Thomas the Twin, and it's like you almost sounds like they're talking about him being Jesus' twin, even though he's already Judas or James's brother. But that comes back to the Adelphoi thing. What if that's what they're all brothers? So like it's all brothers in the Lord, right? That could be a thing.
Well, I mean, I know that the twin theory, that there's a twin theory as far as Jesus's crucifixion goes. Like, the Jesus's twin was actually killed on the cross, and then or Jesus was killed on the cross, and then his twin was seen 3 days later or something like that. Yeah. I don't know. However implausible that would be, I think that it's more plausible than a Jew magically resurrecting.
Right. Yeah, it's just like they pulled it off. Like, listen, if one of us has got to go get, one of us is convicted, I'll go on the cross. But just pretend you're me after it. We'll just perform a miracle. It's like, yeah. It'd be kind of hilarious if that's how it all started. But yeah, man. So Godless Engineer, I have his name right in the title. Click on that and go subscribe. And there's a lot of good stuff on there. And yeah, anything else you want to say? Anything? Any projects coming out you want to talk about, or?
Well, I mean, I've got, like I was saying, I've got a pretty extensive video that I'm writing up a script for right now. That it's 8 pages long, where I kind of go in depth about a couple of things as far as mythicism goes. So, that'll be out at some point. But as far as projects go, I don't have anything specific. I do have a couple of videos that need to get premiered in the this week and next week. Like, I think this Thursday, we're apparently learning that atheism steals our joy, and then the next day it's the Braxton Hunter triple threat. Braxton Hunter, John McRae from What Do You Mean, and Inspiring Philosophy. They say a lot of wrong things about like the Spider-Man analogy, and that kind of goes into some history stuff. So I'm gonna be taking a look at that. But yeah, I pretty much have live streams every Friday night, and we got a Bible study where we're actually reading the New Testament.
Check that out once in a while too.
Yeah, we're actually on the New Testament now, so we're going through a whole bunch of the Jesus stuff where I get to flex my mythicist stuff a little bit. Yeah. But anyways, I mean, that's what I got coming up. If y'all don't hate me after this broadcast, go and subscribe.
No, dude, I get into some heated stuff with people on here. That's just the nature of this type of stuff. Like we disagree, we throw stuff at each other, and that's just how it is. But it's fun to me. I think you enjoy it too.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like I said, I mean, I don't know how heated it looked, but I definitely had at no point had ill will towards you or anybody. So I very much enjoy finding out more correct things.
Absolutely.
So like I totally love the fact that now I know it's like, oh, it's the same, like they share a root word, but they're different uses of it and everything like that, because I enjoy knowing correct things.
Absolutely. That's how if everybody was like that, it'd be a pretty smooth world. If everybody was like willing to just go along and be corrected or something, Yeah. But, all right, man. This was great. And like I always say, you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.